For 11 years, my parents made me believe I killed my sister. They never let me forget it. But last month, I found the real police report, and everything I thought I knew about that night shattered. My name is Lonnie, and this is the story I never thought I'd have the courage to tell. When I was 12 years old, my whole world collapsed in a single evening. My sister Mara, who was 16 at the time, was everything to my parents. She was beautiful, smart, and the daughter they never stopped praising. I was always the quiet one, the one who followed in her shadow. But that night changed the way everyone looked at me forever. Mara and I were supposed to walk home together from a neighbor's house. She was ahead of me, laughing like she always did, running just a few steps too far. Out of nowhere, a car came speeding down the street. I froze. In the next instant, she was struck, and everything went silent. I didn't push her, I didn't touch her, but none of that mattered. By the time the police arrived, my parents had already decided I was guilty. I remember my mother's voice, sharp and cold, saying, "She was with her. She should have stopped her. She must have pushed her." My father never looked me in the eyes. They told the police I was reckless, that I didn't care, and although the officers asked me questions, I was too terrified to speak against my parents. From that night forward, it didn't matter what I said or didn't say. The story was set. I was the sister who killed Mara. The years that followed were like living in a prison. Every birthday, every holiday, every family dinner turned into a reminder. "We'd still have Mara if it weren't for you," my mother would say when I blew out my candles. My father would barely speak to me, except to compare me to the daughter they lost. They called me careless, selfish, and cruel. At school, I withdrew from everyone, carrying a guilt I didn't deserve but couldn't shake off. Whenever relatives visited, they would give me looks filled with disgust. I later learned my parents had told everyone I was the reason Mara was gone. I was just a child, but they made sure I grew up believing I was something monstrous. No matter how much I tried to do better, to earn back their love, it was never enough. Mara was gone, and in their eyes I was the reason. For 11 years, I carried that label like a brand on my skin. It shaped every choice I made, every way I saw myself. And I never questioned it, until the day I found the report that proved everything I had been told was a lie. That evening is burned into my memory. Mara and I had left our neighbor's house after dinner, and the streetlights had just flickered on. She was always the type to rush ahead, calling back for me to catch up. I remember her hair swinging as she ran down the sidewalk, her laughter floating in the air. I walked slower, trying not to trip in the dark. Then everything happened in a blink. A car came tearing around the corner far too fast. Its headlights flashed in my eyes, and before I could even shout, it struck Mara. The sound was loud enough to make the world stop. I dropped everything I was holding and ran forward. Mara lay still on the pavement, and my heart hammered in my chest. Neighbors poured out of their homes, shouting, calling for help. My legs felt heavy, my voice stuck in my throat. I kept saying her name, hoping she'd move, but she didn't. The driver had already sped off into the night, leaving behind nothing but chaos. I was 12 years old, staring at something no child should ever have to see. When my parents arrived, I thought they would hold me, tell me it wasn't my fault. But the first words out of my mother's mouth were, "What did you do?" My father glared at me like I had personally dragged Mara into the street. I tried to explain that she had been ahead of me, that I couldn't stop her, but no one wanted to listen. To them, my silence was guilt. My tears were weakness. The police showed up soon after. They asked questions, but my parents cut in every time. They told the officers I was careless, that I distracted Mara, that I'd pushed her without thinking. Each time I opened my mouth, my father's hand clamped down on my shoulder, warning me to stay quiet. I remember one officer frowning, glancing between me and my parents, but in the end, their voices drowned mine out. Nobody wrote down what I said. Nobody believed me. That night, I sat alone in my room while Mara was rushed to the hospital. The house felt colder than ever before. My parents didn't come to check on me. They didn't tell me what was happening to her. All I heard was the distant sound of the phone ringing and my mother's sobs echoing through the hallway. When the news finally came that Mara hadn't survived, the silence outside my door was louder than any scream. From that moment on, I wasn't just the younger sister. I was the one who lived when Mara didn't. The one who, in my parents' eyes, had caused it all. The way they looked at me changed forever. What really crushed me wasn't the accident itself, but the certainty in their voices when they said it was my fault. It was like they had already decided who I was before I even had the chance to speak. After Mara's death, Life in our house turned into something I could barely survive. Every day felt like a punishment. My parents didn't need to shout for me to feel it. The way they looked at me was enough. Their eyes held disappointment, and every word they spoke carried blame. I wasn't just a daughter to them anymore. I was a reminder of what they had lost. On birthdays, there were no balloons or smiles. If a cake was on the table, it came with cutting remarks. My mother once placed a candle in front of me and whispered that Mara should have been the one blowing it out. Holidays were no different. While other kids I knew opened gifts with their families, mine used those moments to talk about how bright Mara's future would have been. I would sit there, shrinking into myself, as they made sure everyone remembered I was the one left behind. The story spread quickly through our relatives. Aunts, uncles, cousins. All of them treated me as if I carried some kind of stain. At gatherings, conversations grew quiet when I entered the room. Some avoided me altogether. Others looked at me with thinly veiled disgust. No one asked how I felt. No one asked what I saw that night. They only believed what my parents told them, that I was the reason Mara was gone. I started to pull away from the world outside, too. School was a nightmare. I couldn't bring myself to make friends because I thought everyone could see the guilt hanging on me. If a classmate tried to talk, I turned away, afraid that if they got too close, they'd realize who I really was. I spent hours alone in my room, filling notebooks with sketches and words that I never showed anyone. It was the only place where I felt safe, the only way to let out what I couldn't say aloud. What hurt most were the comparisons. My parents couldn't go a day without reminding me who Mara had been. She would have made us proud. My father said once when I came home with an average grade. She would have known how to behave. My mother added when I forgot to wash a dish. No matter what I did, I was measured against a memory I could never compete with. They didn't just grieve Mara. They used her as a weapon against me. With time, I stopped trying to win their approval. I understood that nothing I did would ever be enough. Still, the weight of their words didn't fade. They built walls inside me, and resentment grew brick by brick. I wasn't angry at Mara. I missed her more than I could say. But I couldn't forgive my parents for turning me into their scapegoat. They had chosen to bury me alongside her, even though I was still breathing. By the time I was 23, I was still living under my parents' roof. It wasn't because I wanted to. It was because I had nowhere else to go. Years of feeling unwanted had drained me of any real confidence. Jobs came and went, and every paycheck slipped away to cover basic bills. My parents reminded me daily that I was a burden, and I started to believe it. Even so, something inside me began to stir. Little details in their stories about Mara's accident no longer lined up. For years they told anyone who would listen that I had pushed her. But then, during one heated argument, my mother snapped that Mara had been fooling around in the street. Later, my father muttered that she had stormed off in anger. Each version was different, and the cracks in their certainty made me pause. If they had been so sure all along, why did the story keep changing? I couldn't stop replaying questions in my head. If I had truly caused Mara's death, why didn't the police treat me like a criminal? Why wasn't I taken away or charged? Other kids in my neighborhood had seen children pulled from their homes for much less. Yet I stayed, growing up under constant suspicion, but with no official consequences. That thought gnawed at me day and night. The doubt grew sharper when I overheard relatives at a family gathering. My uncle had been drinking, and with his words slurred, he leaned toward me and whispered, "Your parents never told the full truth." Before I could ask what he meant, he staggered away, leaving me frozen with unease. My aunt, standing nearby, quickly changed the subject and wouldn't meet my eyes. That one sentence clung to me like a shadow. From then on, I started paying closer attention. When my parents spoke of Mara, they avoided certain details. My father would stop mid-sentence and correct himself. My mother grew agitated whenever I asked even the simplest question. The more they tried to silence me, the more I felt there was something hidden beneath their anger. I stayed quiet on the outside, but inside I was restless. I began to recall how quickly they had silenced me the night of the accident, how determined they were to keep me from explaining. At 12, I thought that was normal. At 23, I realized it was not. It struck me that my whole life had been shaped by words they had chosen, not by what really happened. The house that once felt like a prison now felt like a cage full of lies. For the first time, I allowed myself to think that maybe I wasn't the monster they said I was. Maybe they had hidden something far worse than the guilt they placed on me. And once that thought settled in, there was no turning back. I knew I had to search for the truth myself. I couldn't ignore my doubts any longer. The only way to quiet the storm in my head was to see the truth with my own eyes. One morning, without telling anyone, I went to the police station. My hands shook as I walked inside, but I forced myself to the counter and asked if I could see the report from my sister's accident. The clerk looked at me with surprise and said those records were over a decade old. At first, he brushed me off, saying it would take too much time to dig through files that old. I almost gave up, but something inside me refused. I pressed harder, explaining I was family and I needed answers. After days of waiting and a few more visits, someone finally brought out a thin folder. My chest tightened as I opened it. The words on the paper blurred at first because my eyes were full of tears. But once I focused, my heart sank. It said Mara had been drinking heavily at a friend's gathering before she was hit. The officer had written that her blood alcohol level was above the legal limit. She hadn't been pushed, she hadn't been shoved into the road. She had stepped out carelessly after leaving the party. I read the lines over and over, hoping I was mistaken. But the truth was there in black and white. My parents had built their story on a lie. For 11 years, they told me I was the reason she died, when the reality was completely different. The report even noted that I was behind Mara when the car came, which meant I couldn't have forced her forward. The officers had questioned me, but they never considered me responsible. All the blame I carried had come from inside my own home. As I stood in that police station, everything I thought I knew about my childhood collapsed. My parents hadn't just misunderstood. They had deliberately hidden this report to keep Mara's reputation untouched. She was their pride, their golden child, and they couldn't bear anyone knowing she made mistakes. So instead of letting the truth stand, they buried it and placed the weight on me. I left the station with the folder clutched against my chest. My legs felt weak, but my mind was sharper than ever. Every insult, every cold look, every comparison suddenly made sense. It wasn't about me at all. It was about protecting an image of Mara that wasn't real. They had stolen my innocence, my teenage years, and my sense of self. Also, no one would question the daughter they adored. Walking back home, I wasn't just carrying papers. I was carrying proof that I had been living under a lie for more than half my life. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. Now that I had the truth, I would never see my parents the same way again. I waited until the house was quiet before I approached them. My father sat in his chair reading the paper, and my mother was folding laundry at the table. My hands trembled as I placed the police report down in front of them. For a moment, neither of them moved. My mother was the first to react. She glanced at the pages, then at me, her lips pressing into a thin line. My father lowered the paper and stared at the report like it was an inconvenience. "This doesn't change anything," my mother said sharply. "We didn't want people to know Mara was drinking. That would have destroyed her memory." My father added coldly, "She only went out that night because you upset her. Don't think this paper clears you." I couldn't believe how easily they dismissed it. The truth was right there in their hands, yet they twisted it to keep their story alive. It was like they would rather cling to a lie than admit they had punished the wrong person. I tried to argue, pointing out the officer's notes and the blood alcohol results, but they refused to hear it. My father's voice grew louder, insisting I was still the reason she stepped outside angry. My mother shook her head and muttered that Mara would never have behaved that way if not for me. As I stood there, a strange calmness settled over me. For years, I had begged for their acceptance, waited for them to show me some sign of love. But now I saw it clearly, they would never give it. The lie had become a part of them, something they were unwilling to let go of. Admitting the truth would mean facing what they had done to me, and they weren't brave enough to do that. I didn't shout or cry. I simply picked up the report and folded it carefully back into its envelope. Looking at them, I felt something inside me shift. They had stolen my childhood, turned my name into a curse, and buried me under guilt I didn't deserve. No apology could ever return those years. No explanation could erase the pain they chose to inflict. I walked away from them with one thought repeating in my mind. They would regret what they had done. Not because I wanted to hurt them the way they hurt me, but because I was done letting them hold power over me. I knew in that moment that the life they had forced on me was over. They might keep clinging to their lie, but I had the truth, and with it, the strength to take back everything they tried to strip away. That night, for the first time, I didn't cry myself to sleep. Instead, I lay awake planning how to free myself from their grip. They had taken 11 years of my life. I would make sure they never had the chance to take any more. I didn't give them a warning. One morning, while they were still asleep, I packed my things into 2 small bags and walked out the door. I didn't leave a note. I didn't owe them an explanation. For the first time in my life, I felt a kind of freedom I had never known. I rented a small room across town with money I had saved from part-time work. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I stayed away from them completely. No phone calls, no visits, no updates. The silence felt strange at first, but soon it became peaceful. Without their voices in my ear, I could finally think clearly. I started therapy, something I had been afraid to do before. Week by week, I learned to separate who I was from what they told me I was. It was painful, but it gave me strength I didn't know I had. Alongside that, I focused on work. I applied for jobs until one finally hired me full-time. The hours were long, but I didn't mind. Each paycheck felt like proof that I could survive without their control. I began saving, planning, building a life that didn't revolve around their judgment. Every step forward gave me a little more confidence. But while I was healing, I knew I couldn't just leave the past untouched. My parents had painted me as a villain to everyone who knew us. Relatives avoided me, believing their lies. I wasn't going to let that stand. Quietly, I started reaching out. I met my cousins for coffee, visited an aunt who had once been close to me, called relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. I showed them the police report. At first, they didn't believe me. But as I laid the papers in front of them, silence always followed. Some of them apologized, realizing they had judged me unfairly for over a decade. I didn't shout or demand sympathy. I let the truth speak for itself. With every person I told, the story my parents had built began to crumble. The whispers started to spread, and soon, the same relatives who once looked at me with suspicion were questioning my parents instead. For once, I wasn't the one carrying shame. As the weeks turned into months, I felt stronger than ever. Therapy gave me the tools to handle my emotions, my job gave me independence, and sharing the truth gave me a sense of justice. I wasn't just running from my past anymore, I was reclaiming it. My parents had stolen years from me, but they couldn't silence me now. The more people learned the truth, the less power my parents held. Their lie was unraveling thread by thread, and I didn't need to raise my voice to make it happen. All I had to do was show the truth and let it spread. That was the beginning of their downfall, and the beginning of my real life. The shift began slowly. Relatives who once avoided me started sending messages, asking to meet. When we spoke, they admitted my parents' story no longer made sense. Some were angry at themselves for believing it for so long. Others were furious at my parents for twisting the truth. I didn't need to push them. They saw the report with their own eyes and understood everything. Word spread quickly through the family. My parents' siblings were the first to confront them. They called them out for lying, for ruining my life to protect an image that wasn't even real. Cousins who once ignored me now defended me openly. Even my grandparents, who had always sided with my parents, finally spoke up. They called them selfish for blaming a child and letting that lie live for more than a decade. The respect my parents once held was gone. By the time Thanksgiving came around, tension was high. I wasn't invited, but I decided to show up anyway. I walked into the house with the report in my bag. The room went quiet when I entered, every eye on me. My parents looked shocked, as if they thought I would keep hiding forever. Without hesitation, I pulled out copies of the police report and placed them on the table. Then I read the lines aloud, the officer's notes, the results, the truth they had buried. No one interrupted me. The silence was heavy, but it wasn't the same kind of silence I grew up with. This time, it was directed at them. My parents' faces turned red, their hands shaking. My mother tried to speak, but her voice cracked. My father stared at the floor, unable to meet anyone's eyes. For the first time, they were the ones cornered, not me. The reaction was immediate. Relatives turned on them with harsh words. They called them liars, manipulators, and cruel. My cousins asked how they could let a child grow up under that kind of false blame. My grandparents demanded to know why they valued pride over the truth. No one defended them. They stood there exposed, and the shame on their faces was something I had waited years to see. Then something happened that I never expected. Instead of scolding me, relatives began to comfort me. My aunt placed her hand on mine. A cousin hugged me tightly, whispering that they were sorry. Even my grandmother, who had once believed every word my parents said, pulled me into her arms and told me she had been wrong. For the first time in my life, the family I thought hated me finally saw me for who I really was. My parents couldn't say a word. Surrounded by the truth, stripped of their power, They had nothing left to hide behind. And as I looked around that room, I realized the weight I had carried alone for so long was finally being lifted. Not by me, but by the people who once turned their backs on me. After Thanksgiving, my parents tried to reach me in every way they could. Calls, texts, even showing up at my new place, which I never told them about. They must have gotten the address from a relative. I didn't answer at first, but one evening I opened the door. They looked smaller than I remembered, faces tired, eyes heavy, voices shaking as they asked me to forgive them. They didn't say it because they felt true regret. I could tell it was because they had been exposed. Their pride was gone, their reputation shattered, and they were desperate to hold on to something. They talked about starting over and moving past the pain, as if years of being treated like dirt could be swept away with a few words. I listened quietly, and then I told them the truth. I said, "You buried me with Mara, and I clawed my way out alone. I begged you for love, for a chance, and you gave me nothing but blame. You don't get to ask for my forgiveness now." My voice didn't shake, because I had already cried all the tears I had for them. What was left in me was strength, not sorrow. They tried again, saying they only wanted to protect Mara's memory, that they thought they were doing the right thing. That made me feel cold inside. Protecting a memory at the cost of a living child isn't love, it's cruelty. I told them I didn't owe them anything. Not my time, not my presence, not even my anger. I was done. From that day, I cut them off completely. I blocked their numbers, stopped answering the door, and made it clear to relatives that I wanted nothing more to do with them. Some relatives tried to mediate, but most understood. They saw how badly I had been treated and respected my choice. Slowly, the message spread. I was no longer their scapegoat, and I wouldn't allow them back into my life. The fallout for them was harsh. Neighbors who once admired them whispered behind their backs. Family members who once believed them now kept their distance. They became bitter, isolated, and unwelcome in gatherings where they once held authority. It was the kind of loneliness they had forced on me for years, and now they had to taste it themselves. I moved forward. My home became a place of peace, something I had never known as a child. The silence that used to feel heavy was now comforting because it was mine. I filled it with laughter from friends, with music, with moments of real healing. My parents had taken my childhood, but they would never touch my adulthood. For the first time, I felt truly free. Their shadows no longer followed me. Their voices no longer decided who I was. I had cut the ties, and in that final break, I found something I thought I'd never have myself. Looking back, I realized the real loss wasn't just Mara. It was the years my parents stole from me. Losing a sister was painful, but what broke me more was knowing my parents chose to turn me into their scapegoat. They could have loved me through the grief, but instead, they buried me under their lies. For 11 years, I lived carrying a weight that never belonged to me. Now that burden is gone. I no longer wake up with their voices in my head, blaming me for something I didn't do. I no longer walk into rooms feeling like an outsider. The truth freed me in a way I never thought possible. For the first time, I can breathe without guilt pressing down on my chest. My life is my own now. I've built a future without their control, without their judgment. I've learned that family is not always about blood. It's about love, honesty, and respect. The people who stood by me when the truth came out are the ones I choose to keep close. With them, I found the sense of belonging I craved as a child. But I would be lying if I said I left the past completely behind. Some scars never fade, and some betrayals deserve to be remembered. That's why, every year on Mara's birthday, I mail my parents a copy of the police report. No note, no explanation, just the truth in black and white. It's my way of making sure they never escape the reality they created. They wanted me to carry the blame forever. Now they carry the reminder of their lie. I don't do it out of hate. I do it because they need to face what they did, the years they can never give back to me. Their silence in return tells me everything. They feel the sting, and they know they can never undo it. I lost my childhood, but I didn't lose myself. I came out stronger, wiser, and free. And while they sit with the shadows of their own choices, I step into the light of a life I built on truth. Do you think I did the right thing by cutting my parents out of my life? Or should I have tried to forgive them after all the years of lies? Let me know what you think in the comments. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss the next one.